house needs painting, the grass needs mowing. Where's he at?
Hi, this is Hank. Sorry I missed your call. Leave me your name and your number and I'll get back to you.
He's gone fishing.
Welcome to Off the Water with Hank Parker. I'm your co-host, Sarah Beth, and you are...
Hey, man, we got to have more enthusiasm, more excitement. Hey, welcome to Hank Parker Off the Water. I'm Sarah Beth, and I'm Hank Parker, and we're here with a new Off the Water podcast. I've had 2 cups of coffee today, and I'm ready to roll and rock.
I can tell. You got that covered for both of us. How about that?
Oh, you got to get pumped up. Sarah Beth is not a morning person. She don't like getting up at 5 a.m., no matter how good the fish are biting or the turkeys are gobbling or the deer are moving. It don't make any difference. 5 a.m. is not any time to get out of that bed.
No, it's not. No, absolutely not.
I like getting up early and getting the early bird gets the worm. I don't know what I'm going to do with a worm, but I'm going to put it on the hook and fish with it. That's what I'm going to do with it.
I'm sure you will.
Okay, all right, let's go. What we're going to talk about today, Sarah Beth?
I don't know. You said you have some pretty interesting topics that you want to go over.
You know, years ago, I did a video back in the days that Kmart was the lead dog before Walmart took over, and the question was, there was 10,000 fishing lures all laid out and stacked up and piled up, and said, do you really need all this stuff? And that was a great question, and so many people were overwhelmed, and that is in the old days, you know, back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and so now there's more stuff than ever before, and so we're looking at the price of boats. And you're looking at a new Z Ranger 521 decked out with a 250 Mercury and all the Humminbird electronics from 360 to target lock to forward-facing sonar, the Mega Live 2, the 15-inch screens, and one on the console and 2 or 3 up front. And so all of a sudden you're looking at a boat that's $115,000, and people are saying, it's crazy, it's out of control. Where are we going? Do I need that kind of a boat? Do I need all this stuff? And all this technical advantages that you're talking about, are they really advantages, or are they going to help me catch fish?
Right, or is it just something that's being fed to me just to buy?
And so here's the question. Do you really need all that stuff?
Do you?
Well, all right, let's start. If you're fishing a farm pond, the smaller the pond, the easier it is to figure out, because you got the fish hemmed up. They're retained within, let's just say, a half-acre lake. That's pretty easy to read and pretty easy to figure out. And so to have all this electronic stuff would not necessarily help you a great deal. Now, it could contribute in some ways, but for the most part, that would be an investment you didn't need to make.
Right.
But now let's go out to a 45 or 50,000 surface acre lake, and now you're going to have to discern an area that you're able to hem those fish up like that half-acre farm pond. It's a job. Yeah. So the more tools you have to work in your favor, and the more you understand them, the more familiar you are with them, the greater your odds are that you're going to be able to figure out where these fish are and figure out how to catch them. You get that?
No, I get that.
All right, so let's start out. When I started fishing, I had no depth finders on my boat at all. The depth finder was something fairly new. A depth finder on a boat came along somewhere around 1968 or so. Now, before that, Lowrance had a little green box, and that was pretty much the extent. There were a couple other companies, and I don't even know who they were, that had some kind of portable device that had a suction cup for a transducer and had a battery that was contained within the little box itself. And that was the only electronics available. And then Tom Mann came up with the idea there was a Heath kit, which was a portable depth finder that you could put together. Well, Tom took that thing and figured out how to make it waterproof, and you could put it on a boat and made a transducer that would actually attach to the boat itself. So for the first time ever, there is a depth finder that you could attach to your boat.
Okay. So before it was just handheld kind of device?
Yeah, if you had one at all. And most people didn't have one. There was a gentleman, and we've talked about him in past podcasts, a gentleman named Buck Perry from Hickory, North Carolina, that developed some trolling spoons, and he would have these trolling spoons that would go different depths. He'd have one that would run 10 feet deep. He'd have one at 2 miles an hour, let's say, but you had to troll them behind your boat. And then he had one that go 20 feet and one that go 30 feet. So you had trolling spoons. And then they took marker buoys and they would troll and find these high spots, these islands, or these extended points out in the lake, and they'd throw a marker buoy on it, and then you could fish what we called structure fishing, which structure fishing could be deep or shallow, but in the early days of deep water fishing, we just called it structure. Then we later, it was called deep water structure. And so I knew nothing about that at all. So I'm fishing Lake Norman. I lived in Maiden, North Carolina. And so I was just a few miles. Lake Norman was the closest lake. Sometimes I would fish Lake Lookout, and occasionally I would get to go up and fish Lake Hickory. But those were the only 3 lakes that I was fishing when I was 15, 16, 17 years old. Later went down to Lake Wiley. But nevertheless, I was fishing Lake Norman most of the time when I got to go fishing. I had a Southern Star bass boat with a Gale Sovereign outboard, which was made by OMC for somebody, I don't know. But anyway, that was my boat. I had no depth finder, and I had a trolling motor. I had a Shakespeare trolling motor that was a handheld troll motor that we turned the head around backwards, and I had it mounted on the front of the boat with a 2x4 that I'd cut, and it would you could attach it to the front of the boat as you could do on the transom, and that's what that troll motor was designed for, was a transom mount. But now I put it on the bow. Well, that's what all the pros were doing in 1967, 1968. There were no foot control troll motors. Motor Guide came out with a foot control troll motor somewhere around 1968 or 69. But prior to that, it was just handheld troll motors. So I had a trolling motor and no depth finder. So I'm going to Lake Hickory on a pretty regular basis, and my dream is to catch a 5-pound bass. Man, I wanted to catch a 5-pounder. I never caught a 5-pound bass. And Lake Norman was fairly new. It was built in the 60s, so when I was fishing, it was 7, 8 years old. About 1960, 59 or 60s when they opened it up. And so it's a fairly new lake. Good time to catch a big fish. When a lake's new, that's the best time. 7, 8 year old lake is absolutely prime for big fish. So I'm up there, and this guy from Hickory, North Carolina, who became my hero, Blake Honeycutt, and this is before catch and release. Everybody kept their fish back in those days. Blake Honeycutt comes in, and he's got a Ranger boat that has stencil. Ranger is written in stencil on the side of this boat. But it was the coolest boat I ever saw. Man, I thought, God, I'd have that boat. And he had like 115 horsepower outboard, big Mercury. I thought, man, look at old Blake. And he wore a jumpsuit. Everybody wore a jumpsuit. Ray Scott got that started as kind of coveralls. He had him a jumpsuit. But anyway, I watched old Blake take off, and I was so envious. But hey, I'm a pretty good fisherman. I'm up there chunking a spinnerbait and catching some pretty nice fish. And so I came in the same time Blake came in. He had a stringer of bass that the smallest one on that stringer was my dream fish. The smallest one on the stringer was 5 pounds. Man, he had 3 or 4 7 and 8 pound bass. Ooh. Now, I'm blown away. I mean, I cannot imagine catching all those big bass in one day.
Hey, you know what they say? You got to dream big.
Dream
You're
big.
over here. Your dream fish was the smallest one on that scale.
Well,
I bet your jaw was on the floor.
I'm blown away, you know,
Yeah.
and I'm so intimidated, but I was a kid, and Blake was a very gracious man. He looked over there at me, and he could see, it was written all over my countenance, that I was mesmerized. I was blown away. And so he approached me, and he said, "Pretty good string, huh?" I said, "That blows me away. I'd just like to catch one. The smallest one you got on that stringer would be the highlight of my life." And he started laughing. I said, how did you catch those fish? He said, "Well, I caught them on a Hopkins spoon and a plastic worm." Well, I never fished a Hopkins spoon. I thought that was a saltwater bait. You know, I didn't know anything about spoon fishing. And I said, "A spoon?" He said, yeah, vertical jigging. Vertical jigging. What does that mean? He said, "Well, I get on top of the fish." Top of the fish? How do you know there's a fish down there? And so I started asking questions. Well, he had a hummingbird. Mm-hmm. And he said, "You get out there and you look for these, there's a place down there called the Mumbo Dam. And where that old dam was, there's a high spot, and there's some rocks and there's some debris down there. And that high spot, it comes up to about 17 foot of water out of about 30 foot, and they're on top of that hill around that debris." Mm-hmm. And I said, "How in the world you know that?" He said, "Well, we found that years ago with trolling spoons, with the Buck Prairie trolling spoon." He said, "But now that I got my hummingbird, I can see, you got a light up here at 0. And then if it's 17 foot deep, you got a light at 17 feet.
Okay.
And if there's fish in between there, it'll light up."
So no screen, it just lights up the depth.
Yeah, you got just a round dial on a black box, and it goes from 0 to 60 feet deep. And if it's 30 feet deep, you'll have a light at 0, and you'll have a light at 30 feet. If you turn the gain up, and all this is news to me, I didn't know anything about it. If you turn the gain up and the sensitivity up, if there's fish in between that 30-foot light and that 0 light, you will be able to see the fish. They'll light up. And that's what he was doing. He'd get up there on that high spot, and where they normally throw their buoy marker out when they would use their trolling spoons, now that he's got an electronic device that shows him where the bottom's at, he would turn the sensitivity up, and it would show fish that were in between. Well, he would see that, and he could literally drop his jigging spoon down and see it on his hummingbird. He could see it light up.
Yeah, it sounds really familiar, don't it? I'm going to get a jar. That's going to be called the forward-facing sonar jar. I'm going to make you put $1 in it every time you talk about it.
All right. Well, this has nothing to do with forward-facing. There's a transducer on the bottom of his boat at the transom. Well, then later, as time progressed, people figured out to put that transducer on the trolling motor, and they would know exactly where to drop that jigging spoon. Mm-hmm. So now you can imagine me wanting to catch a 5-pound bass. Now I'm seeing Blake Honeycutt, and I'm 16 years old, and I see Blake Honeycutt with a stringer of bass, and the smallest one's 5, and the biggest is probably 8.5. 8.5-pound bass would the dream of my lifetime, you know.
Right. Not the wife and the kids.
No,
it's that 8-pound bass.
No, I'm not married. I'm a young man, and I'm a dreamer, and I want to catch bass, and that's my highlight. And now I'm blown away. So now I got to have a hummingbird. Do I really need a hummingbird?
No.
Well, according to Blake, I do. Do I really need to figure out underwater structure? Because all I was ever able to fish was just exactly like that farm pond. I'll just fish what I saw. So if I rode down the bank, I had no idea how deep the water was I was riding over. I had no idea that there would be a Mumbo Dam out there that in the middle of the lake. I had no idea that there were islands and stumps in 12 foot of water in the middle of the lake.
Right.
I had no idea
Which
that.
you wouldn't know that unless you dove down there and you mapped, like you either saw it yourself or
You
saw it
had
on
to
the
have maps.
transducer.
Yep, topographical maps. There were some of those available. Some lakes had them, some lakes didn't. Well, just about the time that discovery took place, they had the Lake Eufaula Bass Tournament, like in 1969, maybe 1970. And Blake caught 135 pounds of bass in 3 days at Lake Eufaula.
135 pounds.
And Pete Henson had like 65 pounds in 1 day.
Well, that sucks to be him. Imagine
hey,
coming up next to him, the
how
other
did they
guy's
catch
pulling out
them?
135.
How'd they catch these bass? They caught them offshore. They caught them on islands. They caught them on extended points. Well, how'd they find them? With depth finders.
Yeah.
Well, I got to have a depth finder. Well, they cost $100. Man, my boat didn't cost but $300. Now I got and my troll motor was $65. I had to save up a long time to get that troll motor. Now, you mean I got to get me a Humminbird?
That's still true to this day, though, doesn't your?
Hey, here we go. We're talking about, does it benefit you? Do you need it? Did that dream that I had catching that 5-pound bass, would a Humminbird depth finder, would any depth finder, any brand that would show me the bottom and show me fish, would it help me achieve what my goal was in catching that 5-pound bass? And the answer is absolutely yes. Absolutely, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that was beneficial to me.
Right.
So now I got a flasher. I got me a Humminbird flasher. Do you know what flasher means?
No, I could assume it blinks at you, flashes lights or something.
It's those lights. It is. That's what it is. It's a dial, and then that thing goes. That's why Tom had to name it Humminbird. It sounded like a hummingbird wings when that thing went round and around. So now, that is a huge benefit to me. And I learned so much about it. You could go in, if you set your sensitivity, you could go in and a hard bottom would reflect a positive signal. In other words, that light at the bottom would be broad and wide, and you could see that the bottom was giving you a good return signal, so you knew you had a hard bottom. Hard bottom is where you catch fish. Mucky, silty bottoms doesn't hold fish like a good red clay hard bottom or a bottom that has mussel shells on it. Those are the kinds of places you catch fish.
Right.
Those soft bottoms, you didn't catch fish.
Why is that?
It's muck. It's a siltation bottom. There's nothing productive for a fish to be there.
Okay.
They like to hem up bait. And to give a complete explanation, I have seen in real cold conditions that fish like silty bottoms to hang in there because of warmth. But for 99% of the time, they prefer good hard bottom over a silted bottom.
Yeah.
So now I learned with my depth finder, I can determine hard or soft bottom. Made a world of difference. I was throwing a little Carolina rig, a little do-nothing worm, Jack Chancellor called it, little 2-hook Dr. Walker worm. I would throw all these little baits, and when I was on hard bottom, I'd catch fish.
I know that was a huge innovation, especially for that time. Everyone's like, whoa, what is this technology? Did it face a lot of controversy back then?
It changed everything. And the guys that were up on it would get out in the middle of the lake where the fish had no pressure before. Everybody's fishing the trees and the boat docks and the stump banks and the rocky banks that they could see with their naked eye on the shoreline, but not many people were out in the middle of the lake.
Right.
So you became the elite when you started fishing deep water structure. People would brag on people in the bass club that would say, oh man, he's good on that deep water structure, man, he's good with that depth finder. That kind of puts you in a class above the average bank beater. And that's what they would call you. He's nothing but a bank beater. He don't really have the advanced equipment or understanding on how many big fish are out there in the middle of the lake on that deep water structure.
Right. I feel like that's true to this day, though, too. I mean, you look at anglers now, it's like if you don't have that, you're kind of looking
You're getting ahead of us.
Yeah.
You're speeding up. So I'm
Hey,
working my way up.
Come on now.
I'm working my way up. So here we go. We started off with nothing. And now all of a sudden we got this brilliant guy up there in Hickory, North Carolina named Buck Perry that developed a bunch of trolling spoons where you could find underwater structure out in the middle of the lake. So now you're advancing. You're no longer a bank beater. You're a fisherman and you have no limitations. You can find stuff out in the middle. Well, then Tom Mann advanced the whole world by having a depth finder that would mount on your boat, and you could go 50 miles an hour and it would show you the depth.
Wow.
I mean, this is a game changer. And the difference between the haves and the have-nots it's hard to measure the difference. The haves were way ahead of the have-nots when it come to catching fish. And all the pressure that was taking place on the shoreline didn't take place out there on that underwater structure. There were only a number of people that accepted the fact that there was more fish in the deeper water than there was in the shallow water. You know, when we had Bill Dance on the podcast a couple of months ago, he was talking about the first time he had ever caught a fish over 6 or 7 feet deep. It blew his mind, and he learned. Of course, Bill became one of the greatest deep water structure fishermen in his era. I mean, in the 70s and 80s, Bill rocked. I mean, he figured that out, as well as Blake Honeycutt and some of the other guys, Pete Henson, and on and on. There were so many people that were really advanced, and they took advantage. Well, so then we turned the page. We go from the 60s and 70s into the 80s. Well, here comes the paper chart recorders. Now you got a big old chart recorder up there that has paper on it, and you got a stylus that draws out the bottom. So you see more detail than you've ever seen before.
Right.
Well, I'm doing pretty good with my little flasher. So I don't really think I need to go into all this paper stuff until I started fishing with people that had them. Randy Fight.
And then you see it.
Randy Fight from Houston, Texas, or Lake Conroe, Texas. I fished with Randy, and I could see the advantage that he had over me with his paper chart recorder. He knew how to read it. He knew how to jig. He knew how to find fish. He could see them. He could mark them that I could not see on my lights.
Wow.
So now I have to advance to a paper chart recorder. So I move up and I spend the money, and it's a lot of money. These paper chart recorders were $400 and $500 in the 80s. So I get a paper chart recorder. Well, it's not long that paper chart recorder, there's such a hassle. Rainy days, oh my goodness. We had so much trouble with that paper and getting it to print, and a stylus going out. They were a lot of trouble.
I could imagine anything paper on a boat surrounded by nothing but water. That doesn't sound like a good recipe for success.
It was a recipe for disaster on bad, cold, rainy, windy, rain and wind paper chart recorder. So we had lots of issues. Well, then Humminbird comes out with liquid crystal. And now liquid crystal, that is what we have today on our screens that are so magnificent and show detail. So now this liquid crystal unit would do what the paper unit would do. It would show you detail. Now, the early stages, no. But as time advanced, the liquid crystal screens got more and more resolution, showed more and more detail. And so now, you got to have liquid crystal.
It's always the next best thing.
Well, I won. I did not win. I finished second by 1 ounce on the Super Bass tournament at Lanier, Georgia, in I guess '84, somewhere in that era. But I had a Humminbird liquid crystal unit, and it would be, and it becomes being familiar with your unit. A lot of people could have flashers, but they could not do with their flasher what Blake Honeycutt could do. They didn't know how to set the gain and the sensitivity and read fish, and they didn't know how to take advantage of that. Well, that was same with liquid crystal. My unit, if I'm fishing in, let's just say it's 25 foot of water, if there's a fish in 10 foot of water, it would show that fish, and everything below that fish would just be blacked out. It looked just like a chimney.
Huh.
It looked just like a chimney on a house. It looked like
chimney?
a stack of bricks.
A chimney.
A chimney.
Chimney.
Yeah, where smoke goes up.
With an N. Chimney.
Chimney. Don't
Chimney.
make fun of me. But anyway, nevertheless, it looked like it just blocked it out. And so I had a partner in that tournament, and the reason I'm telling this, I think it was funny. Every time we'd catch a fish and that chimney would show up, he would say, "There's that old house again. You're catching fish off that old house." Well, every time he'd say that, I'd wind my stuff in because it's against the rules to have more than one lure in the water at the same time. So you have to wind in what you were fishing with. And I pick up a jigging spoon and I throw it right at the back of the boat where that transducer was. And boom, I'd catch that fish.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, he said, "There's that chimney." And so I threw back in there and I caught one. And he said, "How many dang fish have you caught off that chimney?" Not having a clue that it was a fish. It was blacking out the bottom. So I was more familiar with my units than he was, and it was just really funny that I was able to catch those fish. And he didn't understand that it was the fish itself that was blocking out the signal that went to the bottom. But it was being familiar with your unit and learning how to use it. So now we started out with nothing.
Right.
And because of Blake Honeycutt, I was introduced to a flasher that changed my life, changed everything. Picking up where we were, we had a little technical difficulties, which happens from time to time. But anyway, we were just talking about the fact that the fish on the liquid crystal unit blacked out the screen all the way to the bottom. And so I was going back to summarize where we had come from zero electronics to a flasher, to a paper chart, to a liquid crystal unit. So now the depth finder on a boat that we called it, the flasher, changed everything. Well, then all of a sudden you got this advancement that changed and shuffled the cards once again with the chart recorder. It was not as impactful from the flasher to the paper chart as going from nothing to a flasher.
Right.
Because a flasher, I could run, I could see if I was in shallow water, I could see the hardness of the bottom, I could find all kind of structure. The paper chart recorder didn't do that. The paper chart recorder, for me, I only really benefited from it when I was slowing down at an idle speed, looking for structure, and it gave me more information and more detail about that structure than I could learn on my flasher. Well, then liquid crystal came along. Now it was much like a flasher as far as high-speed operation, showing you hard bottom versus a soft, silty, mucky bottom.
Right.
And so now the liquid crystal has the potential to be as effective and as game-changing as was going from zero to the flasher. But it was lacking in resolution, it was lacking in speed, it was lacking in a lot of things, but it advanced as time went on. So now the liquid crystal becomes the standard. I mean, everybody, all the depth finder companies, some of them resisted them early on and said it'll never be what a paper chart recorder will be. We'll never replace the paper. But they were wrong, and they admitted that as time went on, and that became the standard. So now everybody's got liquid crystal, and it is a benefit. It shows high speed, it shows more detail, it is a screen that prints out the whole bottom. Underwater island kind of looks like an underwater island instead of two lights. fish look more like fish than just a light. So it's advancing, and it's becoming more and more beneficial to the angler. So it becomes the standard. So now everybody's got them. It's just a standard. When you order a boat, you get a liquid crystal recorder, whether it's what brand, it was your choice. There's 5 or 6 brands on the market. And so that became the standard, and that was beneficial. Well, then here comes Humminbird, and they develop side imaging. Side imaging. What is side imaging? Well, side imaging is a signal that shoots out from the side of your transducer on both sides of your boat and paints whatever's out there up to like 125 feet on each side of your boat.
Wow.
And so I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, man, this is some advanced technology. This is going to help me catch fish. And I can't tell you how many times I found structure that I would have never known was there. I'd be fishing a boat dock, for example, and I'd look down and I'd see to my right, the boat dock's on my left. I would see out to my right 60 feet, there's a brush pile.
Right.
Well, the only way I would have ever known that brush pile was there before side imaging was to have gone directly over it, because all I saw was what directly under my boat. Now I'm looking 250 feet, nearly a football field.
Yeah, that's a big change.
Yeah,
for sure.
125 feet on one side and 125 feet on the other side, and I'm seeing all the structure.
How much did you learn about the behavior of bass with that versus what, like, without?
It was not so much about seeing fish. I never have been able, really on side imaging, fish are just kind of little white dots. And I never have, even to this day, I have not been able to discern a whole lot about fish on side image. It was about structure. I could find structure. I'd find that brush pile. If you find that brush pile, you're going to catch fish most of the time. I found rock piles. I found extended points, and it drew in greater detail, much higher resolution. I mean, a tree looked like a tree. A submerged school bus looked like a school bus for the first time ever. I mean, it drew side imaging. It drew an image in greater detail than we had ever seen before, even a greater image than the best paper chart recorders ever drew. Yeah. So now we have got a game changer. Here we go again. We started with nothing. We got a flasher. Then we got us a paper chart. Now we got a liquid crystal. Now we got high resolution in liquid crystal, and now we've got side imaging. Yes. Game changer again. Man, I'm finding structure that I never knew existed, and I can find it far enough away. Before, all I could see was what was under my boat. So if I'm fishing a boat dock and there is a brush pile out in front of that boat dock that I don't know about, by the time I see it, I'm on top of it. Yeah. So I've messed it up. I've probably spooked the fish. They know I'm there. But now with side imaging, I see it out there 100 feet away. I see that brush top.
So you can sneak up on it.
You can sneak up on them and catch them. And so that was a game changer. I can tell you one time I was fishing with a great fisherman, and I went up to fish Peely Island on Lake Erie, and the wind was too bad, so we decided to fish St. Clair. St. Clair at that time, it's a game, it's a different game today because of the gobies. There's some really big fish in St. Clair. But at that time, you caught much, much bigger smallmouth in Lake Erie than you did in St. Clair. But because of the wind, we decided to fish St. Clair. And the guy I'm fishing with is an expert. He's awesome. Well, St. Clair is very, very flat. And we're fishing out in open water, 12, 15 foot of water, 17, 18 at the most. And it's a lot of scattered grass, and we're fishing little tubes, and we're catching fish. And so he's catching 3 to my 1, but we're having a good time, and he gets it, and he's fishing a little special tube, but he's soaked in some juice, and that's when I realized smallmouth really are more about scent than largemouth. He was soaking his little tubes in a formula, and when I figured that out, I started getting into his tubes, and I started catching as many as he did, but that's a story for another day. So we're fishing along there, and we're making television. I got a camera boat following us around. I got a cameraman in my boat. And we're having a good time, and we're catching enough fish that it's interesting, and we can talk to the camera and explain what we're doing. So it's all working out pretty good. And we'd gotten up early that morning and we intended to go to Lake Erie, so we got up really, really early, and then the wind just kept us off of Lake Erie. So it's up now around noon, and I hadn't had one thing to eat. And that morning, my partner had bought a couple of Subway sandwiches and stuck them in the cooler and said, I got us some lunch. So it's middle of the day. So I said, hey, I'm going to stop and eat lunch. Well, now, I did not have side imaging on my front unit.
Right.
I only had side imaging on my console. So I go and I sit down at the console in the driver's seat, and I start eating my Subway sandwich. Well, I'm just casually looking at my side imaging as we go along, and it's all looking the same, and all of a sudden out to the right of the boat about 70 yards away is a rock pile, and it paints this rock pile really good. Well, I can push a little button and run an icon over to that rock pile and push mark and make it a waypoint.
Wow.
So
that's
technology,
cool.
I mean, how impressive is that, and how advanced is that over nothing?
Very.
Yeah, I mean, so
Very.
it's such a game changer. So I marked that rock pile. Mm-hmm. My partner's up there steady fishing. So, and he knows St. Clair really good. He lives there, and he knows Lake Erie really good as well. But nevertheless, I finished my little sub sandwich, and I said, hey, let's go back. There's a rock pile back there about 200 yards away, and it's a waypoint. And you can pull, and I could pull up my waypoint on my front unit as well as my console unit. I had them connected. So I said, pull up waypoint 006 or whatever the number was. I don't remember. I'm just giving them illustration. So I just pull up a number, and that's the waypoint of this rock pile. Mm-hmm. Well, because he knew the lake, he laughed at me. He said, yeah, you wish there was a rock pile there. And no telling what you'd catch for a rock. No, I said, no, there's a rock pile there. He said, how do you know that? I said, oh, just trust me, I know it. Let's go to that rock pile. And so he goes back, and he said, well, it isn't but 200 yards. That waypoint 006 that you just told me is just 200 yards. I said, yeah, it's about 200 yards. That's about right. And we're out in the middle of the lake. He said, how do you know that? I said, well, I just know. I fished here a lot.
I just have a sense.
Yeah, I'm playing with him. You know, I'm not going to tell him the truth. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just messing with him. I said, oh, man, I've known this rock pile. Well, how in the world do you know it? We're out here in the middle of the lake. You can't hardly see land in any direction. So we pull out there, and we catch like 50 bass off of that rock pile.
Wow.
Every cast. I would have never in a million years known that rock pile was there. If it had not been for my side imaging unit, I would have never known that. Yeah. And it turned in a mediocre day into an incredible day.
Yeah.
And we caught bigger fish, and we caught them back to back, and we doubled up. I got to scream that daily double 100 times, and we just had a ball. So he looked at me and said, how long have you known that rock pile was there? I said, oh, about 10, 15 years. He said, you dirty dog. If you'd have told me that rock pile was there, think how many tournaments I could have won. And so finally, then I came clean with him. I said, hey, I'm just sitting there eating that sub sandwich, and I looked at my side imaging, and I ran that icon over there, and I marked that waypoint. I had no clue that rock pile was there. He said, that's amazing. That is amazing technology. I don't have side image. I will have side imaging tomorrow.
Yeah, that is amazing.
Yeah, he said, that is a game changer. And you can just run your little icon over there and mark it and make a waypoint. Yeah, show me how that works. So I showed him. He said, I will have that. As soon as I get off this water, I'm going to order me one. And so now side imaging. is a game changer.
Yep.
Well, then here comes down imaging. All right, and then here comes 360. Oh my goodness, 360. So now you've got side imaging incorporated into a 360-degree circle. So you've got a transducer that rotates and goes round and round and marks. So all around you, 100 feet away from the boat, you can see whatever structure. So now, not only can you see out beside you, you can see what's coming up in front of you. So now, before you ever get on top of that brush pile, 100 feet away, you can see it. Game changer.
Yep.
Game changer. So now you're more efficient. You're more proficient. You are seeing things in advance far enough that you don't mess it up and get on top of it. Before 360, before side imaging, the only thing you saw was what was directly under your boat.
Yeah.
And if a brush pile was 10 feet deep underneath your boat, when you pulled on top of it, most likely you spooked the fish, you couldn't get them to bite.
Right.
But if you saw that same 10-foot brush pile 100 foot in front of you, whoa, game changer.
That is a game changer.
So do you need that? Do you need side imaging? Do you need 360? That's a question. Does it help catch fish? Absolutely. Yeah. It helps me catch fish. Is it important to me? Absolutely, it's important to me. So here we go. Now, forward-facing sonar. Here it comes. Boom, we're going to get...
Put $1 in it.
We're getting fussed at. Is it a game changer? Is it new technology? Is it going to help you catch fish? Is it an unfair advantage? You got to decide all that for yourself. I'm going back. Let's go back to no depth finder at all.
Right.
How did people feel that didn't have a depth finder against people that had them? How did the bank beaters feel about the guys that going out like Blake Honeycutt catching a 70-pound string of fish when I'm trying to catch one 5-pound bass?
Right.
He changed the world. Tom Mann changed the world. He rocked the world. Well, here we go, forward-facing sonar. I didn't take to it. I didn't even plan on getting it.
Right.
You know, I didn't even plan. It's like going back now to Raptors or power poles. I thought, you know, I don't really need those things. I can fish just fine without them. Well, once I put them on my boat, I can't fish without them. I'm blown away how many times I use them. If you're fishing bedding fish, you can see the application, but I can't tell you how many times I use them when I'm not fishing for bedding fish at all.
Right.
I mean, it's something. Do you say, well, do you really need that? Man, they're expensive. It adds $5,000 to the price of your boat. You start putting all this stuff on your boat, and that price tag goes up. You know, the boats are really not that much more expensive than they were 10 years ago.
Right.
It's the fact we're adding $40,000 worth of extras on there that drove the price up. So, do you need that stuff?
Right.
Okay, so here we go. Now you got forward-facing sonar. These guys that are good with it, that accepted it right out of the bat, did to me what I did or what Blake Honeycutt. Let me get me out of it. They did, the guys that got good with forward-facing sonar, they did to the other fishermen that didn't have it the same thing that Blake Honeycutt did to the guys that were the bank beaters that didn't understand deep water structure out in the middle of the lake. Game changer. The haves and the have-nots.
Right.
Big gap. Big gap between the haves and the have-nots. So now we got something that is live imaging. You can actually see that fish as he swims into the screen. You can actually see how that fish, the formation that fish gets in on that structure or even open water for the first time. We've never been able to deal effectively with suspended fish out in open water until forward-facing sonar came along.
Yeah. Those
were fish that were just basically unfishable. So we didn't do a lot of that. Now it's commonplace. Now you can take a little minnow bait and hover over the top of that fish and watch him come up and bite it.
Wow.
Game changer. I mean, whether you like it, whether you don't like it, whether you're for it or against it, it's crazy. So then you ask yourself the question, do I need this? Well, that's a question you have to answer. Is it going to make a difference? Can it help you catch more fish? Now, I said can it. I didn't say will it, because you have to accept it, embrace it, learn it, and figure out how to use it before it's going to be effective. But you can, and it will help you catch fish if you embrace it.
Right. Can
it be a distraction? Absolutely. Yes. I've spent 2 years trying to be good with that stuff. And I'm not. I mean, I admit it. I go out and I spend half my day trying to figure out how to catch a fish on forward-facing sonar. Now, I've been at a huge disadvantage. The brand that I have used, Humminbird, has been far inferior to Garmin and some of the other brands that are on the market.
Right.
And I admit that. I didn't even realize how inferior till I started fishing with some guys that had other brands, and I could see, wow.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing. But now Humminbird has come out with a new unit called Mega Live 2 that is equal to the competitive products, and I can see my lure. I can do things I never could do before. So I'm probably going to get a whole lot better than I am now.
Right.
I've got capability.
Yeah.
Fish Formula's got a new bait pop out that is really helping me see my bait better.
Yeah.
So with all that being done, I have the potential of being a better fisherman. Now, here comes some of the negatives. And I'm not talking about philosophy. I'm not talking about fairness. I'm not talking about whether or not this is right or that is right or this is wrong or that is wrong. I'm just talking about the technology that has advanced from the beginning that has helped anglers catch more fish. And you can deny that forward-facing sonar helps you catch more fish or not, but the potential and the capabilities of the unit showing you live where a suspended fish is out in the middle of a open water, you can now catch that fish, whereas before is virtually impossible. I mean, you'd have to get really, really lucky to catch one. Now it's commonplace. So to deny the benefit of forward-facing sonar is not real smart. You can't, the evidence of what that unit will do is obviously a benefit for certain situations, just as much as all the other technology that we've talked about have been developed from the beginning. Mm-hmm. Now, the philosophy is it's unfair. The philosophy is it's changing the face of fishing. The philosophy is that it's messing up the sport. I'm not here to argue that. That is not our topic today at all. There's a lot of pitfall. There's a lot of disagreement. There's a lot of disruption. But let's go back to where we started with no electronics. Let's go back to the flasher. Let's go back to where we are today with technology. Let's look at what all we have gained for the dollar bill that boat costs now versus what it cost before all this technology and innovation took place. So we're comparing apples to tangerines a lot of times when we talk about the price of the boat. If we stay with apples to apples, you take all those high dollar electronics and the poles off of the boat, then all of a sudden you're really not that much more expensive.
Right.
But in talking about that, the one thing that I overlooked was the maps. Mapping, to me, has been one of the biggest game changers of all. And I'm going to tell you a situation. Lake Murray has got this snot grass in it that drives me out of my mind. And I call it snot grass. I don't know what it is. It's a slimy grass that grows on the bottom. And when it gets on your treble hooks of a little crankbait, sometimes it takes you 2 minutes to get it cleaned off, especially in the spring of the year, February, when I really like to fish Murray. It's your hands are cold, and it's the most aggravating stuff I've ever dealt with. It drives me nuts. Well, I can take my Humminbird unit on the front of my boat and put my map on, and I got a crankbait that's going to run, I'll just use this for illustration. It can be any depth I want it to be, but I was catching these fish last year on a bait that ran about 5.5 feet deep. So I would have my unit, I would set my unit, which only takes a few seconds to do this. Anything less than 6 feet deep will be red. So I can stay on that red line and cast and never get that slime grass on my bait. And I'm so much more proficient. When I was fishing just blind and trying to fish a contour of a point or an underwater island or a dock, half the time I'd get in that grass. So I would spend time after time after time trying to clean that grass off my bait. Well, now I can set that map where everything 6 feet or less is red. I can stay on that red line, and I'm proficient. I don't get that mess on my bait.
Right.
And it helps me catch fish. So do you need that? How big a deal is that? I can take that map, and the guys at Humminbird literally charted the lake. They did it themselves. They didn't take it off of a paper map and transfer it to a chip. They literally went out there and recorded that lake, so it's accurate within an inch. And I can mark that perfect spot on that point where it breaks off into deep water. I can mark that structure. I'm so much more efficient as a deep water fisherman with maps than I ever was without maps. So how important is that?
Right.
So the technology that we have evolved from the time that there were no depth finders on your boat, to the flasher, to the paper chart, to the liquid crystal, to the side imaging, to the down imaging, to the 360, to the forward facing sonar, to mapping, is a total, absolute game changer. Now, you can have any or all. You can pick and choose. It is a buffet. It is your choice on what you put on your boat. But to be honest, all this technology has advanced the capabilities of the fishermen. There are more fish being caught today than there's ever been caught before. And a lot of that has got to do with the advancement of electronics and the technology. A lot of it's got to do with rods and reels and casting further and the right line. There's a lot of variables, but the largest single contributing factor is the advancement of the flasher to the paper chart to the liquid crystal to side image, down imaging, 360, forward facing.
Yeah.
It's yours to do with it what you want. And for me, politically, I don't like where we are. I don't like the negativity. I don't like the controversy between forward-facing sonar and not forward-facing sonar. I don't like that controversy. I want to stay as far away from it. I'm not going to run. I'm not going to hide. I've stated my opinion. I like using it. I'm not good at it. If I sit here and told you the truth, has it helped me catch fish? No, it has not. It's taken away. I've caught less fish because of it, because I've spent so many hours, unproductive hours, trying to learn. And for me, to answer the question honestly, is it as much fun as flipping, pitching, skipping, cranking, doing the things that I've always done? No, for me, it is not as much fun. But I don't like being defeated. I don't like saying, okay, I'm old. It's for these young guys. I'm going to set this one out. I'm not going to participate. I'm not going to learn how to use it. I'm going to accept the fact that I'm an old man set in my ways and I'm old school. No, that is not me. I have never accepted defeat. I believe if a kid can learn it, I can learn it. I believe that I have as much opportunity as anybody, and I'm determined to learn it. And so I'm going to learn it, and I'm picking up on bait pop and some other things that are helping me, and I'm going to get good with it. And it does thrill me when I finally see one and I watch him come up and get my bait. It's so exciting. Now, That's because I hadn't done it very often. The
Right.
thrill may be over with one day, I don't know. But
Right.
until that day comes, I can't tell you that.
Right. Well, we were just talking about that just the other day. I kind of think that some of the televised sports, when they're showing forward-facing sonar being used, I think it's poor cameramanship. Like, people, top complaint is that it's so boring to watch. Like, well, they're not even showing the screens. They're zoomed in on what brand of jeans this guy's wearing or what brand of jacket he's got on. Because, I mean, you know, how they're just sitting there looking at a screen. You're not showing what's happening on the screen. You're just watching a man looking down, you know, so...
We got to get better at that, but it is a very controversial topic, and there are a lot of different viewpoints, some good on both sides. So we'll let somebody, and I've said it 100 times, and if you get mad at me over this, think about it before you write me a nasty email. Think about it. All I want is what is better for the sport. If it's better for the sport not to have it, go for it. If it's better for the sport to have it, go for it. If it's better for the sport to have it part-time, sometimes, one day, 1 hour, whatever, go for it. Let somebody smarter than I am determine what is the best thing for the sport. But what Hank Parker wants, now this is for the record, write this down before you send me this email, that I've sold out, that I've been bought out, whatever. Before you write me this, think about this. I want what is better for the sport. That's what I want. So I'm going to end it on that, Sarah Beth.
All right. Well, then on that note, before we leave, there's just a couple announcements that I want to make. Don't forget about that Mercury giveaway entry. It's completely free to register. Go ahead with the details.
Well, they've changed the rules on that a little bit. All of a sudden, they're saying anybody can enter to win a Mercury outboard up to 300 horsepower. So we're going to give you a link. Now, let me tell you what's happening. We're going to get a pie in the face. Jimmy and I, right now, Bill Dance is going to put a pie in my face and Jimmy's face at the Bassmaster Classic because we're losing. Dance has taken the lead. I was in the lead. Thank you for all your votes. I was in the lead. I'm no longer in the lead. Dance has taken the lead. So I need your vote. I need you to go on this link that we're going to put down to save me from getting a pie in my face. And the benefit to you could win a Mercury outboard up to 300 horsepower.
Right.
So now, please look at that link. Go in there and register because Dance knows I don't like lemon pie. And so he's already prepared a lemon pie to put in my face. Now, if I could convince him to put a coconut pie in my face, I might accept it more readily. But I don't want a pie, and especially a lemon pie, at the Bassmaster Classic in the Mercury Outboard booth. Pow! Right in my face. Please look at this link. I'm begging you. I'm begging you out of desperation. Go and check out this link and go to that link and register, and I will get your vote. To keep that pie out of my face. That's important.
Yeah, that is important. All links will be in the description below, as well as the Huckleberry Apparel link, which we've talked about every single podcast. So I think most people know what it is. But if you are a high school fisherman, if you have a team, if you know somebody has a team, let them know about it, let them check it out, and let them sign up because it'd be really beneficial for their teams.
Go to huckleberryapparel.com and go to high school fishing and check it out. It'll tell you all about it. It's a program that we have put together, Danny Bennett, the owner of Huckleberry, and myself. It's a fundraising opportunity for high school teams to be funded and be independent and not go out of business. So it's really, really important. So check it out, Huckleberry Apparel, and go to the website and go to high school fishing and look at the details.
All right, awesome. Well, with all that being said, make sure you keep your chimneys stoked and the fire warm, and you guys all stay warm and stay safe, and we'll see you next week.
All right, thanks for being with me. God bless you. I'll see you next time. I'm Hank Parker.